Today, I have a guest.
Hi,
Welcome,
mate.
Petrol Ped. But I'm guessing that's not what we really call you, is it?
No, it's a YouTube channel name. Peter, or Pete, or Ped to my friends. So,
Okay, so tell me, where did the name Petrol Ped come from?
so I've been known as Pedro to my family since I was a little nipper. My brothers named me after Pedro Rodriguez, the Formula One driver, who was a favourite of theirs.
So the passion for cars started
Oh,
early.
big style, yeah, in a
Right.
big way. And then Pedro stuck, and then I went to university and it came along with me, and everyone still called me Ped. And then when I started the channel, I thought Petrol Head, Petrol Ped.
We see that,
Yes.
absolutely, but we
Which
didn't
is
know the rest of it.
Great until you start reviewing electric cars.
Yes,
But Tiffany Dell calls me Lecky Peddy.
interesting, okay. So, but today, what are we going to do? Today, I've got the EV.
Yes.
But what we have never covered on our YouTube channel is the whole hybrid
Yes.
scenario. And,
Yes.
and it's not just a plug-in hybrid, I mean, there's a whole hybrid scenario,
It's a complex
right?
story, yeah.
So I'm coming to you as my petrol head, whatever fuel it is,
Yeah.
as my expert
Okay.
to guide me through, because you've got tons of experience with all sorts of different kinds of cars.
This is true. I'm still learning. Every day is a school day.
Same.
And I think actually the challenge is for people who are looking to buy new cars and not just wanting a petrol or a diesel car, it's quite complicated. There's lots of different bits of information out there, and trying to understand what's true and what's not, and what's realistic and what's not, and then match it to their lifestyle. That's really difficult.
Hence the reason for this film.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can start to unpick some of that.
Yeah.
So today I've got, as I said, the Kia Niro.
Yes.
You have.
I have a Kia Sportage plug-in hybrid. Now originally we thought we'd try and get a Niro plug-in hybrid, because Niro is an interesting car. That comes in full battery electric, like you have, but it comes in a hybrid. Some people might call that a self-charging hybrid. We'll come to that in a moment. Or a plug-in hybrid. But they don't actually make the plug-in hybrid one at the moment, so I had to get a Sportage.
Okay, and so tell me, how does it work? What have you got here?
If you think about when it was easy, when you had either a petrol or a diesel car, so there's an engine, an internal combustion engine, and a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid have an internal combustion engine. Okay, so if I pop the bonnet...
Pop the bonnet for me.
So there is an internal combustion engine, and they are normally petrol. So hybrids normally with petrol. You might get some diesels with what's called a mild hybrid, but we're going to just put mild hybrids to one side for now because it gets really complicated really quickly. So you've got a petrol engine, and then over here you've got an electric motor, and there's a battery pack in the car as well.
Where's
So
the battery pack?
again, it depends on the car. In this one, I think it's under the rear seats.
All right.
So
And like my battery pack will take up most of the floor of the car, frankly.
Yeah.
How big would your battery pack be in this one, do you think?
So we measure battery packs in kilowatt hours. Okay, so a battery electric car like yours that only runs on electric, I guess they would range from, let's say, 65 or 70 kilowatt hours up to really big SUV EVs that might have 100 or 110 kilowatt hours. A hybrid, that number's likely to be in the 15, 20, 25 kilowatt hours. So they are much smaller, let's say maybe a quarter of the size.
All right. And all of these orange cables, I'm guessing, is the electric element of...
Yeah, so whenever, and it would be the same if you looked under there, all of the things that carry the high voltage electricity are all bright orange. So in a car you have two levels of voltage. You have what's the stuff that runs things like your stereo and your blowers and stuff. That's 12 volt system. So most people are familiar on a petrol car, you'd have a normal battery. That runs at 12 volts and that runs all the internal gubbins. And then in an electric car, you have a high voltage system, which drives the motor that drives the wheels. So, and all the high voltage cables in here are all the bright orange stuff.
Okay.
Basically.
Now, there are pros and cons.
Yes.
Environmentally, financially, lifestyle-wise.
Yep.
Would you take me for a drive and talk through some of these pros and cons?
Of course I can, yeah.
So, it's not simple, is it? It's never simple.
No.
One of the reasons I love pure EV is it is much more simple.
Yeah.
In the world of hybrid,
Yes.
there are different types.
Yes.
Tell me about them.
So, I guess we'll start off with what you'll either hear called an HEV, a hybrid, or a self-charging hybrid. It all means the same thing. It's like a Toyota Prius with a first mass market hybrid. You've got a petrol engine, You've got an electric motor and battery pack, and the electric motor takes over the drive of the car to aid efficiency predominantly. And a hybrid, the reason that they're called, sometimes people will call them self-charging hybrids, is you don't plug the car in to an external power source.
Yeah.
It just charges the battery up from the motor running along. So when the car is in a deceleration phase or going down a hill, you'll feed some of that kinetic energy from the car back into the battery pack, and it tops the battery up itself.
And so with that one, what's the limiting factor? Is it that because it's charging its own battery with its own kinetic energy, the battery can't be as big? The
battery's not as big. You can't generally, with a hybrid, force it to run as a pure electric vehicle. It will just kick in and out of engine or motor depending on the drive cycle.
Plug-in hybrids.
Plug-in hybrid. Now the battery pack tends to be a bit bigger.
Which you, because you're an acronym lover, what do you call these?
That's a PHEV or a PHEV. I like calling them PHEV. The plug-in hybrid, the name is in the, or the hint is in the name, plug-in. So you've got a charge port on the car.
Yeah.
Normally AC, although there are newer models coming out now that will do the rapid DC charging as well. But because
not many of them.
Not that many at all, but the batteries aren't that big, so you can plug them in, even if you had like a 3-pin, what's often called a granny charger at home, which is running at about 2 kilowatts, you can charge a plug-in hybrid overnight quite happily, and on a normal home wall box, which is normally running at about 7 kilowatts, you can charge a plug-in hybrid in a couple of hours. The thing about plug-in hybrids is now you've got some drive modes. So this one, I can tell this car, I can put it in automatic mode and it decides what it's going to do itself, or I can force it to do certain things. So if the battery is charged, which this one is, I've got a little button down here and I can push it and I can force it. Now it's now running as an electric car.
Okay.
So it's in EV mode and it will stay in EV mode. Even if I accelerate away, it will stay as an EV. The engine doesn't kick in at all. Your range on a typical plug-in hybrid is probably somewhere between 30 to 40 miles for most, and there are some now coming to market that might do as much as 60 miles.
Okay.
So bearing in mind the average journey in a car in the UK is only about 20 miles. Actually, if you've got a plug-in hybrid, most journey profiles you're going to be running as an electric car.
The calculations we're being told are things like, you know, this car might have 280 plus miles per gallon.
Yes.
What? Like just because it's got a 40-mile battery stuck under the seat somewhere? How does that?
But you've got to remember, so there are 2 forms of fuel being used to make this car go along. And miles per gallon is only rating one of them, and that's petrol. So we're currently in EV mode. I am currently doing infinite miles per gallon. I'm not using any petrol at all.
Yes.
I'm not using any petrol at all.
Right.
I'm using electrons. So now, in an electric car, you would look at miles per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So really, when I'm running in pure EV, I should be now talking about miles per kilowatt hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason miles per gallon is so high is that if you look at an average drive cycle, let's say you go to the shops, you're running on electric maybe 60 or 70% of the time. You're not using any petrol at all. Right. So your MPG is going to be really high, like 100, 150 miles per gallon.
So this is why, to me, now having driven EV and feeling very confident to do so,
yeah.
And that, you know, we've been on this journey where everything's improved, charging, remote charging, everything is better with an EV than it used to be. Everything is easier, the ranges are higher. Why bother? Why bother with a hybrid?
Yeah, and I understand some of that, absolutely. The hybrid fan in me would say there are certain use cases where this wins over an EV. So imagine you get home in your Mackie and you've got 50 miles of charge left and you plug it into the charger, and then someone calls you and goes, Philippa, there's a family emergency, you need to get to Nottingham now. In an EV, you're hugely compromised because you then need to get some charge.
Do you know, I know, but what I would do, I wouldn't obviously stay at home because it's a slow charge. I'd take it off charge, get myself to the nearest fast charger.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe make some phone calls and do whatever, but it doesn't take that long before I've got a decent amount of charge in.
I think I've said to you before, these are not a brilliant EV and not a brilliant internal combustion engine car. They are a compromise, but they're a compromise that gives you this foot into the world of EV without having to go full on. And I think what a lot of people might do is buy a plug-in hybrid, learn the whole benefits of EV, and then go EV. It's a gateway drug into EV for me. I'm not convinced that pure EV is the only solution for personal transportation. It needs to be a mix of pure EV, hybrid, we haven't even mentioned hydrogen, and I think that there are use cases for each one, where each one excels. Electric is not the answer for everything. Hybrid is not the answer for everything. Internal combustion is not the answer for everything. But my view is working together as a group of, if you like, powertrain technologies, we'll find an answer with them all.
How much, can I ask without being rude, is you being a stubborn petrol head?
None,
have you got any remnants of that left?
Oh,
because,
I love,
you know, of course, there's a lot of that.
Give me a V12 and a manual gearbox, or a V8 and a manual gearbox. Of course, I'd love that. But then, you know, some of the best cars I've driven, you drive a Porsche Taycan and tell me it's not an amazing car.
So, efficiency.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the difference.
Yes.
Because EVs, as we know, are really efficient.
The motors, an electric motor is very efficient, yes.
So how are we here comparatively?
So again, an electric motor, I mean, it depends on the motor, but you can be talking 80, 85, 90% efficiency in terms of taking electric charge and turning it into motive power. They're amazingly efficient. Whereas a petrol engine, I don't know, 30, 40% efficient. So right. the electric, absolutely more efficient than petrol.
Yeah. How long will these last? That's the other thing, not in terms of just their lifespan, but in terms of
that's
2035.
Downside. So an electric motor has no moving parts really. Batteries last a lot longer than most people thought they would do.
Weight is sometimes outstripping the life of the car.
Potentially. I mean, certainly there are examples of electric vehicles with battery packs that have done hundreds of thousands of miles and
way more
still
than
operating at high levels of efficiency.
And then they're recycled afterwards.
They can be, yes.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, I guess the problem with a hybrid car is you have an internal combustion engine with oily, movie, smelly parts, and they need servicing. So your service intervals on a plug-in hybrid, to this Kia, I think it's 10,000 miles or a year for the servicing, whereas the Nero you've got is, I think it's 2 years or 20,000 miles, and then the servicing is going to be cheaper in an electric car. I think the guys at Kia were saying it's about 250 odd quid for your car, and it's about 400 quid for this.
Yeah. My
biggest challenge with EV is if you're a normal family on an average UK wage, you simply can't afford to buy an EV. They're so expensive.
That's true.
Second-hand EVs are coming down in price, but the biggest problem is you can't go and buy an electric car, or not many electric cars, for 10,000 quid.
No, it's hard. You can, but it's not.
You might buy a Renault Zoe or something,
yeah.
But you can't buy a family electric car for that kind of money.
But the fact remains that an EV vehicle from source to sink, if you like, throughout the course of its lifetime is 65% better in terms of carbon emission, better for the environment than an ICE car. So these are issues that we have to sort out. So we have to have a growth mindset about it rather than...
Oh, for sure. And I think, there's lots of things that I think that there's a lot of investment going on in infrastructure, which makes EVs more attractive and makes me more likely to go from FEV to EV. I still think the living with proposition of an EV could be a lot better. The only EV I would buy to live with is a Tesla.
Wow.
I'm just not a big fan of the styling, and I'm not a big fan of the build quality, but as a proposition, they're phenomenal bits of kit. We're starting to see massive leaps and bounds. I mean, I'm up to Scotland next week for the Kia EV9, their new big SUV, and that's a proper bit of kit. And they've fixed lots of the problems with the charge integration and all that kind of thing with EV9, and I can't wait to drive it because I've heard very, very good things. But it's a continual thing. We've got to keep improving. Yeah. And I do think there's room for everything. And even with internal combustion engine vehicles, if we start looking at things like synthetic fuels for certain types of vehicles, we've just driven past a classic car dealership. Synthetic fuels for classic cars and older cars are a brilliant solution. And I'm sure we will become more electric, but electric doesn't work for heavy haulage, doesn't really work for public transportation. So we need to find other solutions for that too. But for passenger vehicles, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And so you don't think that hybrids are going anywhere?
I think they'll be around for a while.